Another key Hebrew word and some present tense grammar in Yeshayahu, that's Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14, is a little more ambiguous than some rabbis out there like to express, and to determine the most probable interpretation of the Hebrew word Alma to be either maiden, young woman versus virgin woman. As I covered in my previous video teaching on this playlist, but I'm going to get to another key Hebrew word here and the grammar of this verse specifically, and that will be the specific playlist topic of this video, to expound upon this key Hebrew word and the ambiguous present tense grammar within Isaiah. That's Yeshayahu chapter 7 and verse 14. As it is written, therefore, the Most High, His holy name, Himself will give you, speaking to King Ahaz, or Ahaz, however you want to pronounce that, will give a sign. Here's the key Hebrew word is sign. What's this Hebrew word for sign? Ot, or out, however you want to pronounce that. It says, this is the sign. Behold, the Alma, whether it be virgin or just young woman or maiden, shall conceive, as the Christian Bible interpretations will say, the Tanakh, rabbinic Jewish interpretations will put the present tense grammar in there, which is, it could be, I say, is with child. So saying that a virgin or maiden at that time is with child, and will bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, and which means He is with us. And I won't cover that name as we don't see it used by any individual through the rest of the Tanakh and the prophets, or even in the New Testament, as many call it, the Brit Hadashah writings. And I'll cover that in a separate video teaching on the name Emmanuel and why that was chosen in this verse. But first of all, in this video teaching, it is important to have an exhaustive comprehension of the use of this Hebrew word for sign. The simple text, as we say Peshat, and the context within this verse, the Drash, as I'll get into more detail in a following playlist video, of this verse of Isaiah chapter 7:14, has to do with the Most High, Him, asking King Ahaz through the prophet Yeshayahu for a sign. Is it a miracle or is it not a miracle that he's talking about? Again, we'll look at that in a following playlist, but how about this Hebrew word for sign, even by itself? Could it be just a common event that happens regularly? Not a miraculous event? Or could it be King Ahaz's or Ahaz's wife, or Yeshayahu's wife, that is being spoken of here? Some conclude that. Or any religious or any Jewish young woman or maiden in the Tanakh or within history, as far as we know. And of course the name Emmanuel doesn't appear later on, as far as I know, in the Tanakh or Jewish history of someone with this name who fulfills this explicitly explained later elsewhere. So I think it's wise for all of us to see elsewhere this in the Tanakh, this same Hebrew word for sign, the ot here. It's for you Christians out there, it's Strong's number 226, and it can mean a mark, a miracle, a sign, which could be a common, regular sign, not so miraculous, or a token. And so if we look through this and do an exhaustive remez and looking through how this word is used throughout the Tanakh, we'll see, yeah, in some cases it's a miracle, in some cases it's not. We need to confess and admit that the word Evan by itself is ambiguous. And I'll give you, one word. Well, in one place it's used is in Genesis, Bereshit chapter 1 verse 14, where it says he made these lights in the firmament for signs, like this clock he's giving us. The two, one to rule the day, one to rule the night, kind of like a big hand and little hand, and the stars also, kind of like, ways to determine time, and the appointed times, the Moedim, of course. And so it doesn't need to be miraculous, but then also it can be miraculous, like we see in Devarim, that's Deuteronomy, chapter 34. You go to the end there, verses 10 through 12, and it says, "Since that time there has not risen in Israel a prophet like Moshe." Whoever wrote this at the end here says, "Whom Hashem, the Most High, knew face to face." What signs? Here's that Hebrew word, same Hebrew word, out, however you like to pronounce that. No vowels written back then. But it's the Strong's number 226 as well. And it says wonders. Wonders, which is a different, Hebrew word. And so it says, "And the Most High sent him, Moshe, to perform in the land of Egypt upon Pharaoh." So those weren't common everyday events he went to go do before Pharaoh, right? He says, "All his servants and all his land witnessed these signs and wonders." Verse 12, what mighty was in his hand, what great terror, even terror, he invoked before the eyes of all Israel. Signs and wonders, we can see, are synonymous, though. If we even look at the Hebrew word for wonders, they are synonymous. It's almost like a double statement, signs and wonders. And you can see that being used in all their scriptures in the Tanakh, like prayers and supplications. Supplications is like a petition, a request, but it still involves prayer. It involves prayers and supplications are kind of synonymous, and there can be a little difference as well. And we can see that prayers and supplications are often linked together. We see this in 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 28 and onward in that chapter. Daniel chapter 9, verse 3, and many other verses. Don't need to go there. Don't want to get off on tangent too much, but I think we can establish that the word sign can be miraculous, or it can be common event that's not miraculous. And so the context, that's where that will come into later on in my next playlist video teaching. I'll start getting into that because that tells a lot. When we start looking at Yeshayahu chapter 7, more of a broad context than just verse 14 as I'm covering in this video playlist teaching. But on the other note, regarding the grammar, Orthodox rabbis prefer to express the present tense grammar that's in Yeshayahu chapter 7, verse 14. So let's look at that present tense grammar. And, well, without getting into too much detail, I don't have much visual effects to show you the Hebrew letters and discuss the grammar more explicitly, but regardless of how we want to biasly interpret this, I have a rebuttal that is very powerful to express the ambiguity of this. But, we should ask this, is this during the life of King Ahaz, or Ahaz, of Judah, or Yehuda? In the context of chapter 7, this child seems to be prophesied to be alive during the fall of these two kings that ally, Retzin and Pekah, and that rise up against Judah. You see the 10 tribes up north, Israel, starting a civil war with Judah, the southern kingdom, and they ally with the king of Aram, or however the kingdom was expressed at that time. I'll get into that in a later playlist teaching on this, but we will see as I continue here that it is more ambiguous than many want to realize yet. But and also we see, as I mentioned earlier, no child named Emmanuel found within later on in this chapter or book that I know of. And so I will explain in the next video teaching, of course, on the context, the drash, the name Emmanuel. Can be a title as well, and there's much evidence to show that. But regarding the grammar of this verse, getting back to the grammar of this verse, it is important, very important to realize. Point number one, the Most High does not limit himself to present tense or past tense grammar, which can also be referring to future tense, regardless of the grammar of them by itself. Sometimes, in other words, let me put it this way, sometimes he speaks past or present tense of things that have not even happened yet. When we examine the Peshat grammar, it sounds like it's present or past tense, and it's actually talking about something that's as good as done in his eyes, that it's like a promise, like a covenant promise that it's going to happen when he, and this is another way he likes to hide truth. Point number three, he likes to hide truth to get us to seek and to dig, as we see in the book of Proverbs, chapter 25 and verse 2. And so let me give you an example, a couple examples of present tense and how it sounds like it's current time, but it's actually referring to a prophecy of the future as if it's good as done in the present tense here. For example, in Bereshit, that's Genesis chapter 17 verse 5, referring to Abraham, or Avraham, it says here, and this is the Most High speaking, your name will no longer be Avram, or Abram, which means exalted father, but your name will be Avraham, Avraham, father of many, because I have made you, here it sounds like, wow, he have made you the father of many nations. Jacob wasn't he, or, yeah, well, Isaac and Jacob, Israel, was not even born yet. And yet he's calling him a father of many, the father of many nations. He says, I have made you. And again, not to get into the grammar, and I don't have the video technology to, or understanding or capability to show you the grammar, but we see that very clearly, that sometimes he speaks present and even sometimes past tense of things that have not even happened yet. And if you, we see this also commented in the Brit Hadashah writings in the book of Romans chapter 4 in verse 17. For those of you who have your New Testament or Brit Hadashah writings and want to check up on that. But also, let's go to Hosea, the prophet here. In chapter 1, beginning in verse 8, it says, we see that the Israelites are told they are not his people anymore. And then the following two verses, they're called in a present tense, sons of the Most High still. Like a prophesied redemption, even though they're not his people at the time. And so a lot of translators like to express this in their translation, and I'll quote this for you. Beginning in verse 8, it says, after weaning Lo Ruhamah, and it's translated and alliterated in different ways, she conceived and bore a son. This is the wife, the harlot wife that he told Hosea to marry. And Hashem said, the Most High said, name him Lo Yami, which means not my people. It can be translated. And because you are not my people, here the Most High says in the present tense, and I will not be your Most High, your God, as many people would pronounce it and say it. Hope you're not offended by just using that little title there. Now, continuing in verse 10, if you've got, depending on whether you've got the Tanakh or you've got a Christian Old Testament Bible, it would be in either chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, or we have to continue in verse 10. It says sometimes the verse is 1 or 2 off here, as we see, but it says, nevertheless, the people of Israel will number. Here now he's starting to get into the future tense. Will number as many as the grains of the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or counted, so that the time will come when instead of being told, you are not his people, this is my people, it will be said of them, you are children of the living Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Now, continuing here in verse 11 of chapter 1 or verse 2 of chapter 2, it says, then the people of Yehuda and the people of Israel will be gathered together. Here, Yehuda, that's Judah, and Israel. We have to remember they were separated. Judah was down south, Yehuda, and the 10 tribes were called Israel, not Judah. Yehuda, but the 10 tribes were called Israel at the time, separated 2 nations at the time. He says they will be gathered together, all 12 tribes. They will appoint for themselves one leader. One leader. And they will go up out of the land, for that will be a great day, or the day, depending on how you translate it, of Israel. So it'll be a great day. And we haven't seen these 12 tribes come together for hundreds of years, over 2,000 years after the book of Hosea was written. So my oh my, 2,000 years takes a long time. Sounds like a present tense and talking about the future as well. Notice this. After hundreds of years, over a couple thousand years, Israel and Judah, northern and southern kingdoms, have not become one nation completely with all 12 tribes and haven't chosen just one leader to the degree that I see here. Of course, we have, since 1948, we have the nation of Israel coming together, and they do have a prime minister. Today it's Netanyahu. But still, however you want to view this, it's still over 2,000 years, 1948, from the time the book of Hosea was written, and the Most High spoke these words and inspired him to write it. And a lot of Judah, Yehuda, has come back to the land. But do we see the 10 tribes of Israel? Maybe, I'm sure some of them, yeah, absolutely. But it looks like it's going to be a completeness with one leader. And it's in the process of being completed, I would say, right now, in the present tense. That's still going to happen in the future, to be completed by one leader, who I propose is the Mashiach. Therefore, how can we be dogmatic? When we look at this, look at these words, and we can see, even with the grammar, how can we dogmatically say that Alma, virgin birth of Yeshayahu, must be fulfilled during the days of King Ahaz, or Yeshayahu, Isaiah, during their generation? And of course, the continued playlist, I'll show that even more so. But during King Ahaz, in the life of these 2 kings, that were hated and allied against him were left abandoned. You see the 10 tribes being taken by the Assyrians in 721, 722 BCE, in that time frame. But we'll look at those 2 kings being abandoned. But before I do, in the next playlist and continuing in this series, before I do, I must also express that Yehoshua, aka Jesus, was not born until about 700 years after this Alma birth prophecy was given. 700 years. Whew. That sure sounds like a long time. Sounds like too long when we look at the present tense grammar and try to consider what this is looking at. But as I pointed out, it's a little more ambiguous than we might want to admit, even if we're using present tense grammar in there. But 700 years seems like a long time to us. But what about him? Well, we can see in the Torah, in the Tanakh, and even in the Brit Hadashah, that 1,000 years can be like one day, or even less than a day to him. Not very much time. Like I said, he's not limited to time like we are. He's not limited to grammar as we are to express things, and he likes to hide things in all this as well. Might say he's coming quickly or he's coming soon, but in his perspective, 2,000 years is like 2 days or less. And we see this in Bereshit. I'll give you a couple examples here. In Bereshit, Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17 here. It says, "And the Most High, Elohim, commanded the man, saying, every tree," speaking to Adam here, "every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil," important to notice that the bad tree is not just evil. He has to mix good with evil to deceive and to get us off track and to be disobedient to our Maker here. But anyway, not to get off on a tangent there, but he says, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For the day, here it says, the day, ha-yom, the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now, there's a couple ways we can look at this, is that, as soon as you eat of that, it's doomed. You're doomed to die. But he says the day, well, Adam didn't live over 1,000 years. He died less than 1,000 years. And no man has lived over 1,000 years. Methuselah, as many of us pronounce it as in English, he didn't even live to be 1,000 years. 900 and something, don't have it memorized, but you all know what I'm talking about. Well, how about let's go to the book of Psalm here, 90 and verse 4. It says, for from your viewpoint, speaking of the Most High, from the perspective of the Most High, it says here, 1,000 years is merely like yesterday, or a night's watch. Now, a night's watch is less than 24 hours, like maybe a half a day or less. So 1,000 years can be less than 24 hours to him. And so we have to understand that. When we understand, even we can go to the 7,000 year plan, the week plan. I'm not going to get into that, but we see in the Brit Hadashah writings more commentary to magnify and explain this even further. It says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 8 and 9, it says, Moreover, dear friends, do not ignore this, that with the Most High, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like one day. So he can accomplish so much in one day. It can be like what would take us 1,000 years, but it can be like that in reverse as well, that 1,000 years can be like a day, because he's not limited and time goes by fast. Even our own little lifespan, which seems long sometimes. But it says here in verse 9, the Most High is not slow in keeping his promises. It seems slow to us in our little puny human lifespan. It's like a wisp of smoke that vanishes in just a few seconds. In his perspective, it says, he is not slow in keeping his promise, as some people think slowness. On the contrary, and you can read the rest of that if you want, but just to make my point. Therefore, in conclusion, there's no need to be dogmatic regarding the virgin birth prophecy of Yeshayahu 7:14, that it must have been fulfilled within the lifespan of Yeshayahu, Isaiah, or the king of Judah, which was Ahaz or Achaz. So, but what can we be dogmatic about in this verse of chapter 7, verse 14? What can we be dogmatic about in regard to King Ahaz's life in this prophecy? Well, it is very explicit that, 1, 2 kings allied against him, and they were hated and abandoned, and they were unsuccessful. Point number 2, they were unsuccessful in his lifespan and left abandoned, but the exact timing is not given of the birth. It's embedded and hidden, and we need to do some expository midrash, or we can say use all 4 levels of interpretation. If we stick to the Peshat level, yeah, we can argue and debate until the cows come home, as it says. But we need to dig into the Ramez, some expository, and compare the verses, the similar verses and similar Hebrew words, and the drash, the context. I'll get into that in this playlist series, if you'll stay tuned and tune in when you can. And then also, well, we need to get into the Sod level, which is revelation from him. We need to cry out to him to say, give me the truth. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what kind of paradigm shifts I need to make. I want to overcome all prejudice and the bloody history of our ancestors that have caused this hatred between Judaism and Christianity. I just want the truth. Seek it. Seek him first, and everything else you need will be given to you, including eternity.